Hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, we talk to people who are experts in the field of fundraising to help our small and medium-sized nonprofit organizations raise more money and do more good. I can think of nobody better to join us today than from one of my favorite states to visit, Maine. Diane Lebson, she's the CEO and co-founder of Evergreen Philanthropy, and she's got a new book coming out. It's called For a Good Cause, a practical guide to giving joyfully. For those of you who know me well, I like a practical guide as much as anybody else in book form. Diane, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
I am super excited to chat with you today. Like we said, kind of in our pre-show, I feel like we are the yin and yang of fundraising, like fun human beings for fundraising. I may be a highly caffeinated, bouncing off the wall. You're kind of methodical, behind the scenes human being. This is going to be a fantastic interview. But for those of the viewers who are just kind of scrolling through your iTunes or your Spotify, and they're like, "Hey, I want to know more about Evergreen Philanthropy, but I don't know who Diane is." Why don't you give everybody kind of a 5,000-foot view on who you are, what you do, why we're talking today?
Absolutely. So, Patrick, I'm a volunteer. I'm a board member. I'm a nonprofit consultant. And now I'm an author of this really super cool book. And I got to tell you, this book is great, not because of me, but because of the 30 women that I've interviewed in it. So, I founded my consultancy, Evergreen Philanthropic Services, in Maine after spending nearly 3 decades in the nonprofit sector, largely with women and largely leading the women's giving programs for both United Way and Red Cross. So those programs have mobilized tens of thousands of women all across the country, have raised over $2 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars, and we just are empowering women to do good in the world. So we're talking today because I'm going to play off the title of your book a little bit. We are going to help women do good awesomer.
Yes, I like it. This is going to be great. I love the idea of folks taking all the practical advice that they've given and kind of condensing it down. There's so much information out there, and you could spend hours and days and months and years combing through the internet for a host of information on what's best practices. And I think that's what's frustrating, I think, about a lot of nonprofit leaders is they don't know where to start. And I think with 90%, I think that's what the number is, like 90% of the nonprofit realm is female driven, female led. This is such a great, you're such in a great position to kind of talk about sort of who our main audience is. Where do you start? If you're a startup individual or you just joined a nonprofit fundraising organization, what's the first thing that you would give as a piece of advice to someone who's just beginning in their fundraising career?
Step back a little bit before the time you say yes to serve on that nonprofit board, because so many times we react to what's in front of us. Our neighbor will approach us and say, "Hey, I am working on this great fundraiser. Will you come help me?" Or, "Gee, I'm involved with this organization. We need a good board member." And so we're saying yes or no to what's in front of us. But what would happen if we took a step back and thought about what really is it that we're passionate about? Are we passionate about kids? Are we passionate about dogs? Are we passionate about unicorns? And really thought about investing our philanthropic power to what really resonated to us, rather than reacting, proactively, intentionally thinking about what really resonates with our heart. And I think that that's probably the biggest mistake that anyone makes in philanthropy, that they look at what is right in front of them and say yes or no. Let's step back and just think about what's going to make my heart sing.
Is this partially the responsibility of the nonprofit organizations to ask better questions of potential board members and volunteers and donors in general? What I think is a big issue is they just see a name, they see somebody with maybe even high capacity or somebody who is even glancing at them in a positive way, and they immediately pounce on them to go, "Hey, would you join? Hey, would you do this? Hey, would you do this?" Without sort of methodically poking around to see if it's actually a good fit in the first place.
Well, that's a really good question. And I would say it's not in the nonprofit's interest to do so. Think about it. What is the one reason why people give to nonprofit organizations? It's because they were asked. And so a lot of times nonprofits want to go on that momentum. Let's ask them first. Let's get to that person who's got that great big new house. Let's ask them to host that fundraiser. So they've got the power of momentum on their side, which does not serve the interest of the philanthropist who really wants to step back and say, gee, what is it that I'm really into? And how am I going to use my time? How am I going to use my money to make good? So that's where the yin and the yang come into conflict a little bit, because it's in the nonprofit's best interests just to ask people to do things. It's
Mhm.
in the philanthropist's interest to say, whoa, wait a minute. What is it that I really want to do with my philanthropy?
Mhm. I've always found it interesting that I think the nonprofit world is so they get into this little habit where they have a scarcity mindset that say, if I don't ask right now, I'm never going to get any money, and they're the only ones who are saying yes to me, and so we have to double down. Where I'm always intrigued about the possibility of saying, hey, this might not be a good fit, but you know who might be is this organization, and then almost being the connector of the nonprofit world, even if in the immediacy it doesn't benefit you. The donor themselves kind of sits back and goes, well, that was interesting. Tell me more about why or what you do. And they almost become the recruiter for you for even somebody better or somebody more willing to take on the leadership role, or somebody who might be a better philanthropy fit for the organization. And I think there's a bit of a scarcity mindset that comes with that. You got to latch on those claws. And at the same time, I think it's so intriguing to do something radically different in the nonprofit world like that. That just always captivates my imagination of like the what ifs, the Marvel what ifs, if that's the case.
Well, I think that's a really interesting opportunity for people who consider themselves to be philanthropic citizens, as opposed to the steward of XYZ organization. Because let's face it, if you're asking somebody to pause, think about what really resonates with them. You
Mhm.
want them to be happy for life doing whatever it is they want to do. You want them to make a long-term impact as opposed to making the short-term win. And
Mhm.
you're absolutely right, Patrick. The problem is that the way that for many small to medium nonprofit organizations, they're wired to look at things in terms of annual budgets, annual plans. How are we going to get the money now? But yeah, I think it would be pretty radical if you as the executive director of unicorns for North Dakota were to say, I'm not hearing that you really have a big heart for unicorns, but maybe this chicken organization is the one that's right for you. I think that people would stop and pay attention to that and would be a lot happier as a result.
I think this pandemic has done one of two things, and there's very little middle ground that I've seen. One, I think it has encouraged and sort of doubled down everybody's generosity and excitement to support nonprofits. And then at the same time, it has really weirded out, I think, the majority of people on how to have great relationships. And I don't think we need to concentrate on maybe how everybody else is doing well, but maybe those who are stuck in what we like to call in our little conversation, these sticky relationships that we are now in this pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, back into a pandemic, soon to be post-pandemic kind of feel. I'd love for you to kind of give your thoughts on where we are in like face to face, seeing people eye to eye sort of relationship building situation that you're finding some of your clients and some of those that you're serving currently.
Most effective thing that any nonprofit leader, any fundraiser can do right now is pick up the phone. And that is such a hard thing for so many of us to do if we're used to texting,
Mhm.
instant messaging, TikToking, and all of that jazz. People forget that the phone is a machine that it's a two-way communications machine, and you can actually pick it up. You don't have to schedule phone calls in advance, and you can just ask the other person on the other side of the line, how are you? Quiet, don't sell anything, but actually listen to what they're saying. In my experience in working with nonprofits throughout this pandemic, the most successful organizations were those that were able to pick up the phone, ask that simple question, and listen and build that relationship. It's not slapping together a fancy webinar to put it on Zoom and then have everybody's eyes glaze over. It's really stopping and listening to where people are at.
Why is it so difficult to pick up the phone when it was so easier back in the day? Why is it now so difficult? Because I think, and I've experienced with this too, where what if I don't know the answer? What if I don't know what they want to talk about? What if it's a little weird? What if I only leave a message? What if there's so many what ifs rather than I'm just going to pick up the phone, we're going to have a little chat. Why is it so difficult nowadays? I've been trying to figure this one out for a while.
I think it's because, and you tapped into this, Patrick, we want to have all the answers, and we feel as representatives of the particular causes that we're fundraising for that we must have all the answers.
Mhm.
But the truth of the matter is that we don't have to. We could actually go back to that donor who asks that question we just don't know the answer to with a more complete and thoughtful answer. So if somebody were to ask you a question you don't know, say, heck, that's a great question. I don't know. It makes that person feel great, like they have untapped something that the organization hasn't discovered before. And then you could go back, send a follow-up email, think about it a little bit, chat with colleagues, chat with board members, and send a knockout email as a result. You don't have to have all the answers. That's actually the cool thing. We're not little mini charity gods. We are people who are imperfect, and that's why we do what we do.
I love the opportunity to then say, hey, can I give you a call back when I have the answer? And they say, yes. You've just been given the green light for another touch point. And I don't think that people think
Absolutely.
about that, right? You spend a lot of time thinking about how many times do I need to have a conversation with the donor in order to set up an ask to make sure that they feel right and that we're aligned, blah, 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 blah. You've just been given through your, I don't know the answer to this, but I know who does. Can I get back to you on this? And they say yes. You've been given a green light and they now expect your phone call. They'll appreciate the work that put into finding the answer that you didn't have on the tip of your tongue. Nobody's hurt for the less, and you gain a wonderful advantage to every other person who's trying to get them to be aligned with their nonprofit because you went above and beyond what was expected of you. You did it in a way that didn't require you to know everything. And you got another touch point notch on your belt.
Totally. Having that opportunity to follow up with a donor is a great gift because as fundraising professionals, what do we always look for? That how are we going to connect with that person next? Are we going to send them a newsletter? Are we going to send them this mass marketing thing? Are we going to send them this invitation? The donor has just given you a fabulous clue about what they're into, and you can target your cultivation plan, you can target your solicitation around precisely what that donor's into.
It's interesting that you mentioned something too. You're listening for
Mhm.
keywords and key phrases that connect to your mission or whatever you're doing from a program or services standpoint. Picking up the phone is a simple fact of like now you're in, your ears are perked up, and now you're looking for connecting the dots. And what an advantage that is over an email campaign out of the gate. What an interesting thing is you can't really get that out of a text message. You can hear the tonality in their voice. And if you can't get into a face-to-face conversation, it's the next best thing. And we
Mhm.
forget that what a wonderful tool of communication that picking up the phone is. If we don't have a phone, let's just say hypothetically we don't have phones, we don't even know their phone number. I mean, outside of face to face, how do we get over these sticky relationships that we have developed in, especially when we don't know what the next month, 2 months, year is going to look like? How do we maintain what we've already built and knowing that there's going to be hiccups in between with these relationships currently?
That's a great question. And, Patrick, I don't have the perfect answer for that.
And it's okay
Um,
to say, I don't know, Diane. That's the best part.
but if I were an organization who was struggling with that right now, I would do something if I don't have people's contact details, but I've got some sort of way to do mass communications. I would be completely transparent about where our journey is. share the warts, share the joys, because the one thing I've seen about the stickiest relationships that nonprofits have with donors is that donors like to solve problems. And if you are painting this picture of everything is beautiful, we've just undergone 20 some odd months of a pandemic and we've got all these social justice issues, but you know what? Our organization is a-okay. I would say, what a bunch of liars. They're painting a picture that is not entirely true. The most engaged relationships are when I've gone to prospects and said, hey, I've got a problem and I know you. I know that you've got some great ideas and you can help me with this problem. And people get pretty fired up. People want to solve problems. They don't want to give money to everything that is locked down and perfect.
When you're talking to majority of like women leaders and you're talking about that in philanthropy, what are some of the big sort of hurdles that you're finding currently? We sort of brushed aside, there's a lot of talk about equity. There's a lot of talk about sort of what the landscape of the fundraising realm is. For those listeners, the majority of which sort of are female leaders within the nonprofit world, what are you finding that is sort of those top concerns, top issues that you're finding and addressing currently within the nonprofit world?
So are you talking about the top issues that philanthropists face with regards to their own giving? Or are you talking about the causes to which they're directing
I think the
their
causes,
philanthropic effort?
yeah, I would say the causes.
So it's really interesting. I think that this is really a stop and pause moment
Hmm.
right now, because if we were having this conversation a year ago, we'd be talking social justice, social justice, social justice, social justice,
Mhm.
and pandemic social justice. Right now, I think a lot of women leaders are looking around and saying, hey, I saw these things on my social media feed about this organization giving to this to this social justice cause. What exactly is happening here? So I think that a lot of money perhaps ran into the social justice um, space last year, and now people are being intentional and saying, well, what exactly happened with that money? I'm
Mhm.
not saying that people are not investing in that. People want to see what the return on last year's investment was. So that's one area. I've also seen a lot of people looking to spaces that are starting to open up. So if you're looking at the reopening of Broadway later this year, if you're looking at the reopening of museums and taking your kids to see the Nutcracker, that possibility that we used to do, around Christmas time. People are really curious to see what's happened to all of those performers and what's happening in that space. And so much money had been invested towards different exhibits. So much money was invested towards particular productions of shows that I think philanthropists really want to capitalize and help bring that out a lot more. And it doesn't feel so self-indulgent, because last year everybody wanted help, everybody who was on the front line, because it was a full out emergency. Because this full out pandemic emergency has been going on for so long, I think that there's a sense of, okay, we got that. Let's look at what other things are going on in the landscape. So I'd say the arts, culture, museums, education is really a big focus right now.
For a good cause, a practical guide to giving joyfully. Where did the idea, where did the passion come from for writing a book? A lot of people could write books. Most people don't. So you did, and you're in this wonderful pantheon of people who actually did it, and this is amazing. What inspired you to write it?
I was sick and tired of answering questions, the same questions over and over and over and over and over again. And to me, it just seemed so fascinating. Women, we've been at philanthropy for how many generations, how many decades now? And women were asking questions such as, if I'm invited to serve on a board, what exactly are my roles and responsibilities?
Mm.
Or a nonprofit organization has asked me to raise funds for them, but I hate asking people for money. So what do I do? Or, gosh, I I'm working through with a difficult personality in this organization. How do I navigate that? These questions kept on coming up over and over and over again. So I thought there's got to be some sort of resource out there, some sort of Bible that answers all of these questions. So I searched and searched and searched, couldn't find it. I'm like, all right, well, I know a whole bunch of smart people. Let's interview them. Let's document them. And, it's kind of funny because I'm just thinking about your own book in terms of Wednesdays or documenting days. So today is Wednesday. I actually documented and, figured out, let's get the information out there.
I love that. How did you, was there a resounding theme? Was there a resounding question, or was there a resounding sort of piece in every one of the stories that linked everything together of the interviews that you took? Was there one sort of thing that you're reading back on it and saying, this is the one or two things that if I was to take away from the book completely, or seeing that thread that binds all of this, what are those?
I would say the number one thing is that people are asking, how can I be effective as a philanthropist, as a donor, as a volunteer, as a nonprofit executive? What can I do to make sure that what I want to accomplish is moving the needle on a particular mission? That is the overall theme. So whether or not you're directly feeding people who are hungry, or if you are working with kids, people want to be effective because there's so many ways you can slice and dice your philanthropic engagement. People want to make sure that with everybody's time and resources being very limited, that they're making the best use of their time and their money with what they've got.
What was one of the best stories that you got to tell within, or one of your favorite things that you got to write about? I know that, you're sort of as a speaker on the circuit, you get to tell a whole bunch of these stories, and even one or two ones that you just kind of hold back and you're like, I'm going to write about this one day. Was there one that you got to write and for a good cause that you just loved sharing more than most?
I'll tell you, I'm going to answer that question a little bit differently. I am going to share with you the hardest story to tell. And it was mine because I messed up. And in this story, it's one of the last stories towards the end of the book. There's a chapter on how to avoid burnout. And I think that a lot of people get overwhelmed. They've got a lot of stuff going on with work. They're taking care of families, and they become super passionate about a cause, and they start to drown in it. So early in my career, I had a mentor invite me to get involved with a philanthropic cause, and I was all about it. But then my career started ascending. I started, we're focusing in on a partnered relationship, and I started to blow her off. I just ignored her emails. I didn't pick up the phone when she called, and I just blew her off. I thought I was feeling guilty, and I'll get around to it later. And one of the last emails she sent to me was, hey, how are you? Not like, hey, where's this particular deliverable? Where's that? She's like, how are you? The most important thing is our friendship. And how are you? And I didn't have a chance to respond. I just blew it off. So fast forward a couple years, I was living in Australia. She was back in the States, and I wrote her a letter to apologize. And I apologized. I said that her friendship really meant the world to me. And about a week after sending that letter, I checked on Facebook, and she had passed away. I never had a chance to tell her how important she was. And that's what kills me, because we're in this work that we do because of relationship. And the lesson that I wanted to convey with that particular story is that regardless of how overwhelmed we are, we're people who are moved with causes and passions and all of that. Don't lose sight of that. All the stuff that we do, it's busyness. It's the relationships that matter most.
Interesting that we talk about celebrating a lot too, and how nonprofit leaders don't take enough time to celebrate wins, and they don't take time enough to go and remember why they started in philanthropy in the first place, or recall why they joined a board, or what gave them the fire to say yes. I know we talked about like saying no, but like what gave them that confidence to say, yeah, you know what, I'm willing and I'm able to help with this cause and be a champion for it. I think the number one thing that that I try to explain, especially to nonprofit leaders, regardless of what size of an organization they are, is to make sure they carve out a bit of time before either a meeting, a board meeting, an internal meeting, maybe even meeting a donor, is just to celebrate something that they have accomplished, to give them that momentum build to go, hey, I can push through whatever this is because we're doing this, this, and this. And we never remember that enough. And going back to your story too, is that we don't remember to say thank you enough. We don't remember to say and celebrate wins enough. We don't remember to sort of pick up the phone enough because we're always busy. We got enough stuff to do, right? Those pauses, like you talked about, that pause and saying, where do we want to go? What do we want to do? How much impact am I making? It's unbelievably important in the nonprofit world, not only to avoid burnout, but just to remember where your passion comes from.
That is so true. And that is why I try to start all of my meetings with board members, with new donors, to ask the Simon Sinek question: why? Why are you doing this? Why is this important to you? Because knowing somebody's why and knowing our own why, we can use that as energy and fuel when times do get rough and we're overwhelmed with minutia. Yeah, why is a very important reason for why we do all this. And we need a constant reminder every single day.
What was the biggest challenge writing this book? I know, I mean, it's just, it's a lot to unpack. It's a number of interviews. It's a number of stories you have to tell. What was the hardest part about creating it or sort of writing it in general?
Limiting it. Limiting, and because there's so many topics that we could cover in this space. And maybe at some point I'll write a 2.0 version that covers all the things that, I didn't cover. But I think that this is a good starter guide. This is like the training meals version of how to do philanthropy. It's pretty much the basics. If you want to start a nonprofit, it's in here. But I think that there's a lot of things that we don't talk about. So what do you do to build longer sustained relationships? What do you do to engage in direct service in a post-pandemic world when we're still Zooming and social distancing and masking? What is our world going to look like? Because that's ever evolving. So I think it's just really trying to notice that this book is a moment in time. It's an artifact of 2020, 21, and philanthropy is going to look very different 22, 23, and so on.
Speaking of what it's going to look like in the future, and I want you to put on your sort of future telling hat. What are you seeing trend wise, or what can you sort of predict, or at least future cast on what philanthropy is going to look like, what giving is going to look like, any trends that you're seeing as far as the donor goes and as far as organizations go here in the near future?
So I see donors being very intentional and focused on how they want to invest their money. They're consolidating their investments and not sprinkling a little bit here, there, and everywhere. And this is actually a consistent trend. What I see, like on September 11th, people gave to a whole bunch of different nonprofit organizations that were dealing with the aftermath of the terrorist attacks. And then people are like, whoa, we can't do that anymore. We're just kind of spending money all over the place. Let's be focused. So I think after we need to make sure that the frontline workers and the soup kitchens and the homeless shelters, everybody that's dealing with financial insecurity has got their thing. People are going to step back and say, what really needs to be solved right now? And how can I solve that? So I think we're seeing more intentionality on the donor side. On the nonprofit side, I think that there's intentionality as well. I think what the pandemic has done is revealed that nonprofits cannot rely on a single source of revenue. And you're going to see people tiptoeing backwards a little bit from the super big galas and the fancy shoes, the fancy dresses, and all of that, and finding those people. If they really know what the donors are going on, what's going on inside the donors' heads, they're going to have these conversations with donors to say, And how can we work together to be more intentional? So I think you're seeing a migration away from special events and in-person fundraisers to more focused on individuals and their giving, which I think is a very good thing.
Yeah. And how do you begin the conversation with an organization that has traditionally done the in-person galas, the big events, the ones who, well, that's the way we've always done it, Diane. I don't know how to do anything else. And I think there's so much hesitancy to move away from what you're comfortable at, even though you recognize as a nonprofit organization that the world's completely changed and it's bonkers from where it was. How do you start that conversation with nonprofits to say, shake it out of them? You gotta be different. You have to do something different, because if you don't,
Right.
I really fear that a lot of good organizations who are, digging their heels in are going to go by the wayside, because I think some of these more swift of foot groups are going to align more, align better with these individuals who have a lot of capacity and don't want to see some of these big, hairy, audacious sort of events, but want to see massive impact on their investment. How do you start that conversation?
Let the data tell a story. And I've worked with a number of organizations to do this. So you look at their annual reports or their 990s, and in the bucket that shows where the revenue comes from, you'll typically see a couple things. You'll see the amount of money that comes from this particular fundraising event. You'll see, percent of the money that comes from grants. You'll see percent of the money that comes from United Way and federated campaigns, individual donors, online giving. And you show a trend line. Well, what's been going on for the past 3 years? And if you actually show the numbers in a pie chart or in a graphic form of some sort, and you see how much money came from a particular in-person fundraising event, party, whatever, and you see that number going down, and you ask folks, how is that money being replaced? Or what did you do as a result of that? There's an aha moment there. Because for a lot of organizations, that decrease in money has meant, well, maybe we won't be able to serve as many people in this upcoming year.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer to that is, that's bad. Why don't you learn how to dance in the rain? Because we don't know how long the pandemic is going to take place. Let's figure out other ways where you could boost other parts of that revenue to make up for that, because you don't want to turn anybody away. Nobody wants to turn anybody away. Let's find another way to do this.
Mm-hmm. I love that from a perspective, in so much that it requires you to creatively meet donors where they are. And it requires you to focus on your mission, and then just like, hey, how can you help this rather than this event or this appeal or this thing? It builds everything back to mission focused. Are you doing the things that you set out to do? Are you pursuing to make your community better? Are you making the world a better place, one individual or one family at a time? What's your impact? And if you concentrate back on that, if you get back to center, and I think this is what this pandemic, I think, has taught a lot of organizations or a lot of leaders within organizations, it got you back to why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. And I think the smaller organizations that never figured that out, even the larger organizations that never really figured out what on earth they're doing or couldn't describe their impact, have gone by the wayside. And the ones who have survived and now are thriving, remember why they exist. It goes back to your mentioning last time, or the Simon Sinek was, go back to your why. Are you doing those things? That is going to be so much more authentically relatable to donors here in the near future than I think anything else that you can do with bells and whistles and invites and galas and shoes and dresses and big bands. It doesn't matter, because people have already done that. They've already realized that they can live without that. They can't live without making an impact and feeling good about what they're doing and what their generational legacy is going to be. That is where you should be focusing all of your efforts on.
Absolutely. I draw the analogy between what we do in the nonprofit space with dating. And when I've taught when I've taught major gifts courses to new giving officers, I said, the objective that we have is to marry our donors. what we're trying to do is we're trying to make that long-term commitment. And I'd rather make that long-term commitment based on what is inside a donor's heart and if that heart is aligned against mission. If I have to focus on the fancy dress and the fancy shoes, that's all a distraction from what the core long-term objective is, which is that long-term sustained relationship with our donors.
I feel like you and I should do an entire course on don't be the Tinder of nonprofits. Like, I think that's like, you and I should do this. This will be great.
Let's do it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, the yin and the yang, because I was actually, it's funny, I'm thinking about when I was getting ready for this episode too, Patrick, I saw you talking with somebody about, golf shirts are like yoga pants for
Yeah.
women. And
Yeah.
I think that there are so many real life analogies between what we do in fundraising and real life. And it's because the bottom line is, like I said before, it's all about relationships.
100% about relationships. And I don't think you can try to be something that you are not, trying to help people that you don't care about. The authenticity and the enthusiasm that you really want to shine out, do it. Because anything that you're trying to do and hide behind, it's going to get found out sooner or later. And really what donors are, and you know this just as well, is that donors are trying to figure out where they fit. And if you can be that right fit, if you can be that date that turns into meeting your parents, that turns into a long-term relationship, that's the best. And it makes you both feel amazing.
Absolutely. That's what is the point of differentiation for us all, because donors don't want to be in a group of, an organization that's just like every other one.
Mhm.
They want to feel like they've caught lightning in a bottle. And that's what we as nonprofits should aspire to do, give our donors lightning in a bottle. And that's what will differentiate us.
Diane, your book For a Good Cause, a practical guide to giving joyfully, is released October 12th. Am I correct with that?
You are indeed.
I love it. Where can people get a preview? Where can they go get these books and buy a whole bunch of them for their board and their leadership team? How do we get this book?
Absolutely. Well, there's two ways. You can go on to Amazon.com, put my name in the search engine, and the book will pop up. It's available for pre-order now. Or you can reach me via my website, which is www.evergreenphilanthropy.com, where you can order the book from there and also engage me in a conversation around how we can help you make sure that you capture lightning in a bottle for your donors as well.
As always, we're going to have all the links in the show notes, and I really encourage you to go out and do some digging. Go on evergreenphilanthropy.com and go check out what Diane is up to and get a good preview of For a Good Cause. It's going to be an amazing book, and I think anytime that an author can really gather some of the brightest minds and interview a number of people and really tell relatable stories to make fundraising and philanthropy more accessible, simpler, understandable. I think that is really where I think it lifts all ships, and you're going to do a fantastic job of it. I'm so excited to read the book myself. So I'm going to order myself a copy. So you should too. Dan, thank you so much for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast. It is so fun to chat with you over the interwebs and over the podcast microphones. And I am really excited to now have you in our circle of friends. And thanks so much for your advice and your practical commentary for all of our listeners as well. Appreciate you.
Glad to be here, Patrick. Thanks for having me.